Get up. Move. Now. You deaf? I'm the pilot of this aircraft.
I'm sorry, what?
A real VIP is boarding, and I need this seat. So get your black ass to the back where you belong.
I paid for the seat.
He laughed right in her face.
Paid? With what? Food stamps? People like you don't fly first class. You clean it.
Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something deeper than that.
Move before I call security and have them drag you off, like the stray you are.
6 passengers, 12 eyes, not one voice. Simone Fletcher stood up, grabbed her bag, walked to row 22. She didn't say another word. She just pulled out her phone and sent one text. That single text is about to change everything on this plane. The terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Private Aviation smelled like jet fuel and fresh leather. Gate 7B had marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Everything about this place whispered money. Simone Fletcher had walked through the automatic doors at 6:47 a.m., carrying a single canvas tote bag. No rolling Louis Vuitton. No designer sunglasses perched on her head. She wore an oversized oatmeal cardigan over a plain white tee, dark jeans, and flat-soled boots that barely made a sound on the marble. Her reading glasses sat on the bridge of her nose. Her hair was pulled back in a simple twist. She looked like someone's favorite auntie heading home after a weekend visit. The woman at the check-in counter had glanced up, then glanced back down at her screen. No smile, no greeting, just a flat, "Name?" "Fletcher. Simone." A few keystrokes. The printer spit out a boarding pass. The woman slid it across the counter without making eye contact. "Gates to your left. Boarding in 12 minutes. Simone took the pass, tucked it into her tote, and walked toward the gate. She passed a man in a tailored navy suit who got a full smile and a "Welcome aboard, sir." She noticed. She always noticed. At the end of the jet bridge, the aircraft waited. A Gulfstream G700, $75 million of aerospace engineering wrapped in pearl white paint. Its interior had been custom designed, from the carpet fibers to the stitching on the headrests. Simone knew every inch of it. She knew the thread count on the seat covers. She knew the exact shade of walnut on the trim panels. She knew the tail number by heart. November 715 Echo Foxtrot. Her mother's birthday, November 15th. But nobody here knew that. Captain Derek Greer had 15 years in the air. Former Air Force transport pilot. Square jaw, steel gray temples, the kind of posture that said he'd never slouched a day in his life. He ran his aircraft like a military operation. Every passenger got sized up the moment they stepped through the door. Simone had stepped through the door, and Greer's eyes had tracked her from shoes to hair in under 2 seconds. Canvas tote, worn boots, no watch, no rings, dark skin. He'd already made his decision. Now Simone sat in row 22, middle seat, between a sleeping businessman and the college kid with headphones. She placed her canvas tote beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked toward the front of the cabin, where the cream leather seats glowed under soft lighting. Those seats. She'd personally selected the upholstery for each one. She pulled out her phone and opened a single contact, typed 3 words, hit send. Then she folded her hands in her lap and waited. Row 22, middle seat. Between a businessman drooling on his own shoulder and a college kid bobbing his head to music no one else could hear. Simone Fletcher sat down, buckled her seatbelt, pressed her back against the seat, and for the first time since the guards grabbed her, she let herself breathe. Her right arm throbbed. 4 red marks ran across her forearm where the guard's fingers had dug in. She pulled her cardigan sleeve down to cover them, not because she was ashamed, because she wasn't ready to think about it yet. The bruise was already darkening. She pressed 2 fingers against it and felt the heat rise through her skin. A souvenir. That's what it was. A souvenir from a man who decided her seat assignment mattered less than her skin color. The cabin hummed. Overhead bins clicked shut. The seatbelt sign chimed on. And from the front of the plane came a sound that made her jaw tighten. Laughter. Captain Derek Greer stood at the entrance of the jet bridge, belly pressing against his uniform shirt, hand extended like he was greeting royalty. The man walking toward him looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for Swiss watches. Silver hair swept back, navy suit tailored to the millimeter. Tan, so even it had to come from a bottle. Victor Ashland, 53 years old, real estate. Old money married to new ambition. Mr. Ashland, welcome aboard, sir. Absolute honor. Greer's voice carried through the entire cabin. He wanted everyone to hear it. Right this way. Seat 1A. Best seat on the aircraft. Seat 1A. Simone's seat. The one she'd been dragged out of 4 minutes ago. Ashland settled in like he owned the place, crossed his legs, adjusted his cufflinks. A flight attendant appeared within seconds. Not Tanya, but Linda Marsh, senior cabin crew. Blonde hair pinned tight, smile pinned tighter. Champagne, Mr. Ashland? Dom Perignon, if you have it. Of course, sir. She poured it with both hands like she was serving communion. The same Linda Marsh who had stood 3 feet away while a black woman was hauled out of her seat by 2 guards. The same Linda Marsh who hadn't blinked. Greer leaned against the cockpit doorframe, arms folded over his gut, grinning. He caught Linda's eye and nodded toward the back of the plane, toward Simone. Then he muttered something. Linda covered her mouth. They both laughed. Simone saw it. She saw the nod. She saw the covered mouth. She saw the laughter aimed at her like a weapon. A woman in row 4 turned around, glanced at Simone, then quickly looked away. A man in row 6 stared straight ahead, as if the ceiling had suddenly become fascinating. The businessman in 2C, the one who had watched the guards grab her arm, was now reading a financial magazine. He hadn't turned a single page. Nobody spoke. Nobody would speak. That was the agreement, the silent contract of people who witness something ugly and choose comfort over conscience. Simone watched from row 22. 26 years she'd been building this company. 26 years of boardrooms where she was the only black face. 26 years of handshakes where men squeezed too hard, talked too loud, and looked over her shoulder for someone more important. She was used to it. But being used to it wasn't the same as being okay with it. A small voice broke through. "Ma'am?" Simone looked up. Tanya stood in the aisle holding a bottle of water. She was young, mid-20s, dark skin, natural hair pulled into a puff. Her name badge was slightly crooked. Her eyes were red. "I brought you some water. I'm sorry about what happened." Tanya's voice was barely above a whisper. "I tried to say something to him. I told him you had a valid ticket. He said if I opened my mouth again, he'd have me fired. He said..." She stopped. "What did he say, Tanya?" "He said he doesn't need 2 of them causing problems on his plane." 2 of them. Simone let that sit for a moment. "How long have you been flying?" 8 months. "And has he done this before?" Tanya looked at the floor, then back at Simone. "Twice that I've seen. Both times it was..." She paused. "Both times it was someone who looked like us." Simone nodded slowly. She unscrewed the water bottle, took a long sip. Then she reached into her tote and pulled out a small leather notebook, black cover, no label. "Thank you, Tanya, for the water, and for trying." Tanya nodded quickly and walked back toward the galley. Her hands were shaking. Simone opened the notebook to a blank page. At the top, she wrote a date. Below it, she wrote a name. Captain Derek Greer. Below that, she started writing. Details, times, exact quotes, the guard's grip on her arm, the bruise forming on her skin, Linda's laughter, the champagne poured for someone else in her seat, Greer's nod toward the back. 2 of them. She wrote it all down. Every word, every look, every second of silence from the passengers who watched a black woman get dragged to the back of a plane and chose their magazines over their morals. From the front cabin, Greer's voice boomed again. He was telling Ashland about the aircraft's features. "Top of the line, sir. Only the best for our clients." He patted the armrest of seat 1A, Simone's armrest. Simone didn't look up. She kept writing. The notebook was small, but what was inside it was about to become very, very big. 45 minutes into the flight, Captain Derek Greer did something he almost never did. He left the cockpit, not because of turbulence, not because of a mechanical issue. He left because Victor Ashland was the kind of man Greer wanted to be seen with. And the cockpit didn't have an audience. Greer squeezed his way down the first-class aisle, his belly brushing the armrest of seat 2C. He stopped at 1A and planted himself like a man at a cocktail party, one hand on the overhead bin, the other gesturing as he talked. "So, Mr. Ashland, what brings you to Atlanta?" Ashland swirled his second glass of champagne. "Business. Big one, actually. I'm closing a deal with Fletcher Aeronautics. You heard of them?" Greer's eyebrows lifted. "Fletcher Aeronautics? Course I have. Biggest private fleet on the East Coast. Military contracts, corporate charters, they're everywhere." "Everywhere." Ashland leaned back. "And I'm about to become their exclusive real estate partner. Every new hangar, every terminal lounge, every VIP suite. My company builds it." "That's massive. Who's the CEO? I've never seen them in the press." "Nobody has. Some recluse. Never does interviews. Never shows up at industry events. Just runs the company from the shadows." Ashland chuckled. "Honestly, probably some trust fund baby who inherited the whole thing from Daddy. You know how it is." Greer laughed. A big, belly-shaking laugh. "Oh, I know exactly how it is. These days, anyone with a rich father thinks they're a CEO." "Exactly. But their money spends the same, right?" Ashland raised his glass. Greer pretended to clink it with an invisible drink. They laughed again, louder this time. Then Greer tilted his head toward the back of the plane, lowered his voice, but not low enough. "Speaking of people who don't belong, you should have seen the one I had to remove from your seat earlier. Some black woman with a canvas bag trying to sit in 1A. He snorted. "I told security to handle it. Took about 30 seconds. Ashland smirked. "In first class? What is this, a bus?" "That's what I said. My plane, my standards." Greer patted the armrest of 1A. "This seat's for people who earned it." From row 22, Simone heard every word. She didn't flinch, didn't shift in her seat, didn't even look up from her laptop. Her face was a mask, perfectly still. But beneath that mask, something was being cataloged, filed, stored. Trust fund baby. Inherited from Daddy. Some black woman with a canvas bag. What is this, a bus? She thought about her father. James Fletcher. A man who spent 30 years on his knees under aircraft wings, with grease under his fingernails and pain in his lower back. A man who brought home a mechanic's salary and made it stretch across rent, groceries, and a daughter's dream of flight school. James Fletcher died at 58 from a heart attack on the tarmac of a regional airfield in Indiana. He never saw his daughter's company reach its first billion. Trust fund baby. The words landed on her like spit, but she didn't wipe them off. She let them sit. Because words like that had a way of becoming evidence. On her laptop screen, columns of numbers glowed. Maintenance reports for this aircraft, fuel efficiency logs, crew scheduling records, safety compliance audits. She scrolled through them the way a surgeon reviews scans before opening a patient up, looking for what's wrong, knowing she'd find it. And she did. Panel C on the starboard overhead compartment. A safety latch that should have been replaced during last month's inspection cycle. The maintenance log showed it as inspected and cleared. But the latch was loose. Simone had noticed it when the guards walked her past it. She'd heard the rattle, a sound that shouldn't exist on a properly maintained aircraft. She typed a note into her laptop, added it to the file. The college kid next to her, headphones still on, hoodie pulled up, glanced at her screen. His eyes widened. Spreadsheets, dashboards, fleet analytics with tail numbers and route maps. He looked at Simone, looked at the screen, looked at Simone again. She closed the laptop halfway, just enough to block his view, just enough to keep her secrets where they belonged. From the galley, Tanya watched Greer hold court with Ashland. She watched him laugh, slap the armrest, tell another story about some senator he'd once flown to Martha's Vineyard. She watched Linda Marsh refill Ashland's glass for the third time with a smile she never once offered to the woman in row 22. Then Tanya looked toward the back, toward the woman who had thanked her for a bottle of water when she deserved an apology from the entire crew. Something wasn't right about this. Tanya could feel it, the way you feel a storm before the sky changes color. Something about the way that woman sat, the way she observed, the way she wrote things down. Not angry, not defeated, something else entirely. Patient. That's what she was. Patient, like someone who already knows how the story ends. Greer was still talking. He'd moved on to his military career now. Transport flights, VIP missions. He told the story the way he told everything. Loud, self-important, the hero of every sentence. I've flown generals, Mr. Ashland, senators, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. I know quality when I see it. He smoothed his epaulets. And I make sure my aircraft reflects that. His aircraft. He said it without irony, without hesitation, like the words belonged to him. From row 22, Simone's pen moved one more time across the leather notebook. His aircraft. She underlined it twice. 35,000 feet above Georgia, a man was building a monument to his own ego in the front of a plane. And in the back, the woman who actually owned that plane was building something too. A case. The first time Simone Fletcher sat in a cockpit, she was 9 years old. It was a Tuesday. After hours at Midway Airfield, a small regional strip outside Gary, Indiana, where her father James worked as a line mechanic. The pilots had gone home, the ground crew had clocked out. But James Fletcher had one more fuel line to check on a Beechcraft King Air that had been leaking for 3 days. He brought Simone because her mother, Ruth, was pulling a double shift cleaning cabins at O'Hare. No babysitter, no family nearby. So Simone sat on a milk crate in the hangar and did her homework, while her father crawled under airplane bellies with a flashlight between his teeth. But that Tuesday, the Beechcraft's cabin door was open, and Simone climbed in. She didn't touch anything at first. She just sat in the left seat, the captain's seat, and stared at the instrument panel. Altimeter, airspeed indicator, attitude gyro. She didn't know the names yet, but she memorized the shapes, the positions, the way the gauges sat in their housings like eyes watching the sky. When James found her, he didn't yell. He climbed into the right seat, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and said, "You want to know what all these do?" She nodded. He taught her every instrument that night. Took 2 hours. She remembered every word. That was the beginning. Ruth Fletcher cleaned airplane cabins for 22 years. She scrubbed armrests, emptied sick bags, picked gum off tray tables, and vacuumed carpets that smelled like recycled air and spilled coffee. She did it at O'Hare, then at Midway, then at O'Hare again when Midway cut staff. She came home smelling like industrial disinfectant and never once complained. James worked the ramp at Midway Airfield until his knees gave out, then switched to engine work. He could diagnose a turboprop issue by sound alone. Mechanics half his age came to him for advice. The airline never promoted him, not once. In 30 years, he went from line mechanic grade 2 to line mechanic grade 3. 1 grade, 3 decades. He never said it was because of his skin, but Simone watched. And Simone counted. She counted the white mechanics who got promoted over him. She counted the supervisors who called him Jim when his name was James. She counted the Christmas parties he wasn't invited to. She counted it all in a notebook. Different notebook, same habit. At 17, she won a full scholarship to Purdue for aeronautical engineering. At 20, she had her private pilot's license. At 22, her commercial license. At 24, she was the youngest black woman in Indiana to earn an ATP, Airline Transport Pilot Certificate. Her father drove 4 hours to watch her get it. He stood in the back of the room, coveralls still on, grease still under his fingernails. When they called her name, he didn't clap. He just put both hands over his mouth and cried. 2 years later, James Fletcher collapsed on the tarmac at Midway Airfield. Heart attack. 58 years old. Dead before the ambulance crossed the access road. Simone was 26. She took his life insurance, $43,000, and leased a single Cessna 172. Started a charter service out of a hangar she rented by the month. She flew the routes herself. She answered the phones herself. She cleaned the cabin herself. Ruth told her she was crazy. "Baby, you have a degree. Go work for Boeing. Get a pension. Get health insurance." Simone said, "Daddy spent 30 years fixing planes for people who didn't know his name. I'm going to build planes that carry his." Fletcher Aeronautics. Named after a man who never sat in first class, never wore a suit to work, never flew as a passenger on any aircraft in his life. 18 years later, the company operated 43 aircraft across 12 states. Private charters, corporate contracts, 2 military logistics deals with the Department of Defense. Revenue north of $400 million. And every single plane in the fleet carried a tail number that meant something. A date, a name, a memory that only Simone understood. November 715 Echo Foxtrot. The plane she was sitting in right now. Her mother's birthday. November 15th. Ruth had retired 3 years ago. Simone bought her a house in Savannah with a garden and a porch and a view of the marsh. Ruth still kept a pair of cleaning gloves in the kitchen drawer. Old habits. Now Simone sat in row 22 of her own aircraft, bruise darkening on her arm, notebook open in her lap, listening to a pilot with a gut and a God complex tell a stranger that her company was probably run by a trust fund baby. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed, felt the hum of the engines, her engines, vibrate through the seat. Then she opened her eyes, picked up her pen, and kept writing. James Fletcher never got justice. Not from the airline, not from the supervisors who overlooked him, not from the system that ground him down for 30 years and then let him die on the concrete. But his daughter was on this plane, and she had a notebook, and she had a name on every document that mattered, and she was just getting started. The seatbelt sign chimed on at 7:52 a.m. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've begun our descent into Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta. Current weather is clear skies, 68 degrees. We'll be on the ground in approximately 14 minutes." Greer paused, then added, with the warmth of a man who saves his best voice for his best audience, "I'd like to extend a special thank you to our distinguished guest, Mr. Victor Ashland, for flying with us today. It's been an absolute privilege, sir." No mention of any other passenger. Not one. Ashland unbuckled his seatbelt, even though the sign was on. Nobody corrected him. Linda Marsh collected his champagne glass with a smile that could have been on a billboard. "I hope the flight was to your satisfaction, Mr. Ashland." Couldn't have been better. First-class service, first-class crew. He winked at her. She blushed. Greer came out of the cockpit one more time. He stopped at row 4, then row 10, working the cabin like a politician on election night. When he reached the back, he paused at the edge of coach and looked at the rows of passengers the way a farmer looks at livestock. His eyes landed on Simone. "Everything all right back here?" He said it to the section, but he was looking at her. "I hope the accommodations are," he paused, smirked, "suitable for everyone." The businessman next to Simone shifted uncomfortably. The college kid didn't notice. Simone met Greer's eyes, held them for exactly 2 seconds, then looked out the window. Greer chuckled to himself and walked back to first class. As he passed Linda in the galley, he muttered, "At least she stayed quiet. Last thing I need is one of them making a scene on landing." One of them. Again. Linda nodded, said nothing. Complicity by silence. In row 22, Simone closed her laptop, slid it into her tote bag, folded the leather notebook shut, and tucked it beside the laptop. Then she straightened her cardigan, adjusted her reading glasses, and sat back. The plane descended through layers of cloud. Atlanta spread out below, highways like veins, buildings like teeth, the airport a sprawling organism of concrete and motion. Simone knew every runway, every taxiway designation, every square foot of the private terminal her company leased on the east side of the field. She pulled out her phone. One notification. A reply to the text she'd sent 2 hours ago. 3 words. "We're ready, ma'am." She read it, put the phone away, and for the first time since boarding, something close to a smile crossed her face. Not warm, not triumphant, just ready. On the tarmac below, preparations were already underway. A black Suburban with tinted windows pulled into the private arrival zone. The Fletcher Aeronautics logo, an eagle in mid-climb over a stylized F, gleamed on the driver's door. Behind it, a second vehicle, a silver sedan. 3 people stepped out of the Suburban and lined up at the base of the jet stairs. They stood shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped in front, posture straight. They looked like they were waiting for a head of state. Nolan West, Vice President of Operations, 46, former logistics commander, U.S. Navy. Built like a man who still did push-ups at 5 a.m. He carried a leather portfolio in his left hand and a tablet in his right. His jaw was set. He'd read the text, too. Patricia Hayes, Chief Legal Counsel, 51. Harvard Law, 20 years in aviation regulatory compliance before Simone hired her away from a firm that was billing her out at $900 an hour. She wore a charcoal suit and an expression that could freeze a deposition. Garrett Cole, Head of Flight Standards and Safety, 39, former FAA inspector. The kind of man who read maintenance logs the way other people read novels, cover to cover, every footnote, every amendment. He was already holding a clipboard. All 3 had received the same text. All 3 understood what it meant. The boss had found something. And when Simone Fletcher found something, people lost jobs. The aircraft touched down at 8:06 a.m., smooth landing, Greer's one genuine skill. The plane taxied toward the private terminal. Through the window, Simone could see her team standing at the base of the stairs. She recognized Nolan's posture before she could make out his face. She recognized the Suburban. She recognized the logo she'd designed herself 14 years ago on a napkin in a diner outside Indianapolis. Home. Or the closest thing to it. The aircraft stopped. The engines wound down. The forward door opened, and a set of stairs unfolded onto the tarmac. Greer appeared first. He adjusted his cap, smoothed his shirt over his belly, and positioned himself at the top of the stairs like a sentinel. Then he turned and gestured to Ashland. "After you, Mr. Ashland. Your welcoming committee awaits." Ashland stood, buttoned his jacket, shot his cuffs, walked to the door with the confidence of a man who assumed every room and every tarmac was arranged for his arrival. He descended the stairs. Broad smile, right hand extended. He walked straight toward Nolan West. "Gentlemen, Victor Ashland, here for the Fletcher Aeronautics Partnership meeting." He thrust out his hand. "Which one of you is running the show?" Nolan glanced at Ashland's hand, shook it once. Brief, professional, cold. Then he looked past Ashland's shoulder toward the aircraft door. "We're aware of your appointment, Mr. Ashland. Someone from our partnerships team will be in touch to reschedule." "Reschedule? I flew here specifically for this meeting. Our CEO hasn't deplaned yet." Nolan's eyes stayed on the aircraft. "We're waiting." Ashland turned around, looked at the plane, looked back at Nolan. "Your CEO is on this flight?" Patricia stepped forward, checked her watch. "She should be right behind you." "She?" Ashland blinked. Behind him, the other passengers filed down the stairs. The businessman with the magazine, the college kid with the headphones, a woman in a linen blazer, a couple holding hands. Then the doorway was empty for a moment, just sunlight and the hum of the auxiliary power unit. And then she appeared. Oatmeal cardigan, canvas tote bag, reading glasses, hair pulled back in a simple twist. Simone Fletcher stood at the top of the stairs and looked down at the tarmac, at her team, at the Suburban, at the logo on the door, at the two men, one in a suit, one in a uniform, who had spent the last 2 hours laughing about people like her. Victor Ashland stared up at her. Every ounce of color drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Captain Derek Greer stood 2 feet to her left, mouth open, hand still frozen in a half gesture from escorting Ashland down. His brain was doing the math. The woman, the seat, the guards, the canvas bag, the words he'd said. All of them, every single one. Simone adjusted her glasses, shifted her tote to her left shoulder, and walked down the stairs, one step at a time. Nolan West straightened his tie. Patricia Hayes squared her shoulders. Garrett Cole tucked his clipboard under his arm. All three stepped forward as Simone's feet touched the tarmac. "Ms. Fletcher, welcome back." Nolan said it the way soldiers greet a commanding officer, respect baked into every syllable. He handed her the tablet. "Your briefing for this morning. Board meeting at 10, Hangar 6 inspection at noon, legal review at 2. "Thank you, Nolan." Simone took the tablet, scanned it for 3 seconds, and handed it back. "Push the board meeting to 11. I have something to handle first." Behind her, Victor Ashland hadn't moved. He stood on the tarmac like a man whose parachute had just failed. His right hand, the one he'd extended to Nolan moments ago, hung at his side. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I'm sorry. Did you say Ms. Fletcher? As in, Fletcher Aeronautics?" Patricia turned to him. No smile. "Simone Fletcher, founder and CEO." "Yes." Ashland's eyes darted from Patricia to Simone, to the cardigan, to the canvas tote, to the reading glasses. His brain was rewinding the last 2 hours. Every joke, every laugh, every sip of champagne in seat 1A. The seat that belonged to the woman standing in front of him. "Ms. Fletcher, I had no idea. You didn't know." Simone's voice was level. No heat, no tremor. Just facts. "That's evident, Mr. Ashland." Simone turned away from Ashland, slowly, deliberately, like a judge turning from a witness who had already convicted himself. She walked toward the aircraft stairs, toward Captain Derek Greer. Greer hadn't moved from his spot near the door. His face had gone from red to white, to a shade of gray that belonged on a hospital wall. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning air being cool. His belly, which had pressed so confidently against his uniform shirt all morning, now seemed to sag, like the air had been let out of him. Simone stopped 3 feet in front of him. She didn't step closer. She didn't need to. "Captain Greer," he swallowed. Miss Fletcher, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. I'd like honest answers." Greer's mouth worked. No sound came out. Behind him, Linda Marsh had appeared at the aircraft door. Her face was the color of milk. Her hands gripped the door frame so hard her knuckles were white. Simone's voice stayed calm, measured, the same tone she used in boardrooms when a contractor tried to overbill her by 6 figures. Question 1. On what basis did you order security to physically remove me from seat 1A and relocate me to the back of this aircraft? Silence. Greer's eyes moved to Nolan, to Patricia, to Garrett, looking for help, finding none. Mr. Ashland was a priority client, and I made a judgment call based on what, Captain? My boarding pass was valid. My ticket was paid. What specific factor led you to decide I didn't belong in first class? Greer's jaw clenched. He had no answer that wouldn't destroy him, and they both knew it. Question 2. Are you aware of Section 12.4 of Fletcher Aeronautics Anti-Discrimination and Passenger Rights Policy? Greer blinked. Yes, I've reviewed the employee handbook. Section 12.4 states that no crew member shall relocate, deny service to, or alter the seating assignment of any passenger based on race, ethnicity, gender, religion, or socioeconomic appearance. Violation is grounds for immediate suspension and referral to the FAA. Did you know that when you told your guards to drag me to the back of the plane? Greer's silence was its own confession. Question 3. Simone paused, let the morning air carry the weight of it. How many times have you done this before? Greer's eyes dropped to the tarmac. His shoulders caved. The epaulets he'd been smoothing all morning suddenly looked like they weighed 50 pounds each. He didn't answer. Tanya stepped out of the aircraft behind Linda. She'd been standing just inside the door, listening. Now she walked forward. Her voice was shaking, but her words were steady. I can answer that, Miss Fletcher. Every head on the tarmac turned. In the 8 months I've been on Captain Greer's crew, I've seen him do this twice before. Both times to black passengers. Both times he used security to remove them. Both times he gave their seats to white passengers he called VIPs. She swallowed hard. Both times I reported it. Both times nothing happened. Patricia Hayes was already writing. Garrett Cole had his clipboard out. Simone looked at Tanya. Really looked at her. Then she nodded. Thank you, Tanya. That took courage. She turned back to Greer. The pilot stood there, gut hanging, sweat dripping, epaulets crooked, looking like a man watching his career bleed out on a tarmac. Captain Greer, you are suspended from all flight operations effective immediately. Your credentials will be held pending a full investigation. Garrett, she turned to Cole. I want his passenger manifests and complaint records for the last 12 months. Every flight, every reassignment, every incident report filed, and every one that should have been filed but wasn't. On my desk by 8 a.m. tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. Simone looked at Linda Marsh. Ms. Marsh, you were present for everything that happened this morning. You watched. You said nothing. You laughed. She paused. Your conduct will be reviewed as part of the same investigation. Linda's lips trembled. She nodded once. Simone adjusted her reading glasses, picked up her tote bag, and walked toward the Suburban without looking back. Behind her, Derek Greer stood alone on the tarmac. No passengers to impress, no cabin to command, no aircraft to call his. Just a man in a wrinkled uniform, watching the woman he'd humiliated walk away with everything he'd ever wanted. Power, respect, and the plane he'd been pretending was his. The crew shuttle idled on the far side of the tarmac. A white van with tinted windows and the Fletcher Aeronautics logo on the side. It was used for transporting flight crews between terminals. Today, it was a hearse for a career. Derek Greer walked toward it alone. No one walked with him. No one offered to carry his flight bag. The ground crew watched him cross the asphalt, the same ground crew who had snapped to attention when he taxied in 40 minutes ago. Now they looked through him like glass. He climbed into the shuttle, sat in the back row, put his flight bag on the seat beside him. The driver, a young man in a Fletcher polo, glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. He'd heard. Everyone had heard. News travels fast on a tarmac. Bad news travels faster. The van pulled away. Greer watched the Gulfstream G700 through the rear window. His plane. Except it was never his plane. It had always been hers. Every bolt, every stitch, every instrument he'd ever touched, every announcement he'd made from that cockpit. My aircraft had been a lie he didn't know he was telling. That thought would follow him for a long time. Inside the terminal, Linda Marsh sat in a plastic chair outside the crew lounge. Her hands were clasped in her lap. Her phone was face down on the table. She hadn't called anyone, hadn't texted anyone. She was thinking about the exact moment she could have spoken up and didn't. The moment Greer told the guards to grab the woman's arm. Linda had been standing 4 feet away. She'd seen the red marks form on the woman's skin. Then she'd walked to first class and poured champagne. Administrative review. That's what Patricia Hayes had called it. It sounded clinical, professional. But Linda knew what it meant. Her name was now attached to an incident file, and in aviation, incident files don't disappear. They follow you. They show up in background checks and reference calls and whispered conversations between hiring managers who always remember the name, but never remember the context. 11 years of perfect service records. One morning of silence. And now she sat in a plastic chair, waiting for someone to tell her what her future looked like. Meanwhile, on the other side of the terminal, Victor Ashland was trying to salvage the most important deal of his career. He caught up with Simone just before she reached the Suburban. His stride was half jog, half power walk, the kind of movement a man makes when dignity and desperation are fighting for control. Ms. Fletcher, please, just 5 minutes. Simone stopped, turned. Her expression was the same one she'd worn in row 22. Calm, patient, unreadable. Mr. Ashland, I understand this morning was irregular, and I want you to know I had absolutely nothing to do with what happened on that plane. I didn't ask anyone to move anyone. I simply boarded and sat where I was directed. Where you were directed? Simone repeated it slowly. Into my seat. I didn't know it was your seat. You didn't need to know it was mine. You needed to know it was someone's. A woman was physically removed from her assigned seat so you could drink champagne in it. And you didn't ask a single question. You just sat down. Ashland's mouth opened, closed. And then, Simone continued, you spent 2 hours in that seat telling the pilot, my pilot, on my aircraft, that the CEO of my company was probably a trust fund baby who inherited everything from daddy. The color left Ashland's face in stages, pink to white to a grayish nothing. My father was an aircraft mechanic, Mr. Ashland. He died on a tarmac. He never sat in first class. He never flew as a passenger on any plane in his entire life. And he built the foundation of everything you just laughed about at 35,000 feet while drinking my champagne. Ashland took a step backward. Not because Simone had raised her voice. She hadn't. That was the thing. She didn't need to. The partnership deal is off the table, Mr. Ashland. Permanently. My legal team will send formal notice by end of business today. Ms. Fletcher, this contract is worth $40 million, and my integrity is worth more. Patricia will arrange your transportation. We're done. She turned and walked to the Suburban. Nolan opened the door. She got in. The door closed. The engine started, and the vehicle pulled away. Ashland stood on the tarmac. $40 million deal. Gone in 90 seconds. Because he'd laughed at the wrong joke in the wrong seat on the wrong plane. Back inside the terminal, Patricia Hayes sat at a conference table with 2 junior attorneys and a stack of personnel files. Greer's records. 12 months of flight logs. And what they found made Patricia reach for her phone. 14 complaints. 14. Black passengers moved from premium seats without justification. 3 Latino families downgraded on international routes. 2 complaints filed by crew members, both quietly buried by a regional operations manager who had since been promoted. A pattern, not an incident. A system. Patricia called Simone from the conference room. Simone answered on the first ring. 14 complaints. All buried. There's also a crew member complaint from Tanya Brooks, filed 6 weeks ago. It was marked resolved without any follow-up. Simone was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, fire the regional operations manager, refer Greer's case to the FAA, and get Tanya Brooks on my calendar for tomorrow morning. What for? A promotion. 3 months later, Fletcher Aeronautics made the front page of Aviation Weekly, not for a new contract, not for a fleet expansion, for something no airline had ever done before. Simone Fletcher stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Marriott Marquis. Behind her, a screen displayed the Fletcher Aeronautics logo and 4 words, The Dignity Standard Initiative. 200 aviation executives sat in the audience. Airline CEOs, FAA officials, union representatives, journalists from 6 countries. And in the 3rd row, wearing a new blazer and a name badge that read, Director of Cabin Experience, sat Tanya Brooks. 8 months ago, Tanya was a junior flight attendant who couldn't report a racist captain without being threatened. Now she led a team of 42 trainers implementing the most comprehensive anti-bias program in commercial aviation history. Simone had built it from the ground up. 6 weeks interviewing every crew member in her fleet. 1 question. Have you ever witnessed a passenger treated differently because of how they looked? The answers filled 3 binders. The Dignity Standard wasn't a pamphlet or a 30-minute online quiz. It was a complete restructuring. Mandatory bias recognition training, anonymous reporting hotlines, quarterly audits of seating reassignments, and a zero-tolerance policy that meant what it said. Simone didn't mention Derek Greer by name. She didn't need to. 3 months ago, she said, a woman boarded one of my aircraft with a valid first-class ticket. She was removed from her seat by security, verbally degraded, and relocated to the back of the plane. The reason was her skin. Silence. Not polite silence, the uncomfortable silence of an industry looking in a mirror. That woman was me. She let it land, and if it happens to me, the person who owns the plane, imagine what happens to the people who don't. The passengers who can't fire the captain, who can't cancel the contract. They just sit in row 22, and they carry it with them to the next flight, to the next hotel lobby, to the next job interview where someone looks at them and decides in 2 seconds where they belong. In the audience, a woman in the 5th row wiped her eyes. Tanya Brooks sat perfectly still. Her hands were steady now. They hadn't shaken in weeks. The dignity standard is about building an industry where a 9-year-old girl can climb into a cockpit after hours, stare at the instruments, and believe, truly believe, that one day that seat will be hers. She thought of her father, grease under his fingernails, 30 years under aircraft wings, a heart attack on a tarmac in Indiana. She didn't say his name, but she felt him in the room. The applause lasted 45 seconds. Tanya was the first to stand. 3 weeks later, the FAA revoked Derek Greer's pilot license. 23 documented incidents spanning 4 years. He filed no appeal. He never flew again. Linda Marsh resigned before her review was completed. She sent a handwritten letter to Simone's office. Simone read it, filed it, never responded. Some apologies arrived too late to require an answer. Victor Ashland's company lost 3 aviation contracts in the weeks that followed. He sold his firm 18 months later at a significant loss. And Simone? On a Tuesday morning in November, she boarded a Fletcher Aeronautics aircraft at Hartsfield-Jackson. Same terminal, same gate. Oatmeal cardigan, canvas tote, reading glasses. A new captain stood at the cockpit door. Young, sharp uniform. He greeted every passenger by name as they boarded. Every single one. When Simone stepped through the door, he smiled. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome aboard." She walked to seat 1A, sat down, placed her tote beneath the seat, and for a moment, she let herself close her eyes and feel the hum of the engines. Her engines. Her plane. Her father's legacy in every bolt. What would you have done if you were in Simone's seat? Stayed quiet or spoken up right there? Drop it in the comments. If this story hit different, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because these stories, they're just getting started.
Greer lost his license, Ashland lost his $14 million deal, and Simone went back to seat 1A, where she always belonged. But here was stay with me. Simone didn't explode on that plane. She didn't need to. She sat in row 22, opened a leather notebook, and wrote down every word, every look, every second of silence. Then she turned one morning into a whole industry standard, the dignity standard. That's protect every passenger who doesn't own the plane. That's what power actually look like. Not the loud voice in the cabin, not the man smoothing his airplane, calling it my aircraft. Power is the woman in the back row, quietly building a key that changed everything. Her father died on the tarmac at 58. Never got promoted, never sat in first class. But his daughter named every plane after someone she loved and made sure no one else would be dragged out of the seat they earned. So think about this. If dignity only belonged to people who can fire the captain, is it dignity at all? And when 6 passengers watched and said nothing, were they innocent or were they part of the problem? What would you have done in Simone's seat? Drop it in the comment. Share this if this hit different, and subscribe. This story is just getting started.